Hello and welcome to the Great Shrimp Shoal. This is a place where you can learn all about my journey into at-home shrimp keeping, starting with my very first videos over a year ago. Today we're going to see something completely shocking, and I think that you'll probably lose your mind when you see it for yourself. Anyway, let's get right into it. Despite all our best efforts, something can invariably go wrong during the introduction of new fish to an equally new tank. They could have a parasite. They could get stuck in the filter return, something that I have recent experience in. They could die from osmotic shock or just choose not to eat and starve to death. Overall, lots of unplanned death in the world of aquarium keeping. It's just the circle of life, and we have to remind ourselves that the smaller fish and invertebrates just don't have long life built into their genetic codes. Most of all, this is just simply beyond our control. I have been watching over the ghost shrimp that were just added to the 20-gallon tank, and I have been very pleased with their acclimation so far. I have had a few losses over the last few weeks, which is to be expected, especially since the tank is in the middle of a massive transformation. The ghost shrimp will have to basically call this their home as the environment quadruples its biomass, grows and loses a ton of algae, and even gets a community of new snails to keep some of the uglier stuff at bay. To put it bluntly, I have expectations that there will be some losses, and that's why I picked a hardy but ultimately inexpensive shrimp to test all these new elements out on. On the plant side of things, the Anubis are doing well. The Monte Carlo is creeping as Monte Carlo does, and the concrete form that encloses the plants has become a great surface for bacterial growth. Honestly, there's lots of bacteria. It seemed like everything was going according to plan, and that is until I noticed something pretty disconcerting. The dirt cheap filter that I had chosen for this tank does a good job at taking in water and passing it over a very highly customizable media space. In that media space is a sponge for general filtration, a fine mesh bag filled with granular carbon, and a bunch of free-floating biomedia pellets. Water goes in and passes through the side channels, down to the bottom, and then out through the top, passing through all of the levels of the media space. The problem started as the sponge became congested and began to push up the rest of the media. It wasn't worrying at first, just a few lost media pellets and a bit more cleaning that I'd like to have to do, but nothing that would take more than a handful of minutes. And then I saw the real concern. A shrimp had somehow made it inside of the filter. How? I don't know. You see, the AquaClear filters are workhorses, and like any workhorse, it isn't designed for beauty or safety. My Marineland filters are amazing, and they have tight seals with great filter pathways. The AquaClear just fires water through its tubes like a garden hose, and it largely works because there's a path from one end, the beginning, to the other end. There are lots of breaks in that path, however. AquaClear filters are known for this type of behavior. I have known a number of YouTube fish keepers and heard anecdotal evidence that these filters can overflow without much warning. The problem lies in its strength of customizability. Basically, if you load it the wrong way, the water pathway can become blocked, and the only way out is up and out of the filter compartment, usually in a puddle on your floor. So, my media filter compartment had become clogged, thereby pushing the sponge up and creating a large cavity in which this shrimp had somehow found a space to set up shop in. Obviously, the filter flow had been reduced, but it's no less amazing, as this shrimp has somehow found its way past the impeller assembly and down into the filter compartment, passing through a number of tiny, confined spaces. Then I got another surprise. It wasn't just one shrimp. There were two. What I thought was a refraction of the shrimp in the filter basket on the plastic was actually a second ghost shrimp that had come along with its friend and set up shop in the filter compartment below the basket. This larger shrimp was outside of the basket but stuck in the area underneath it, as it was probably too big to pass through the filter grate. There are these little tabs that keep the filter basket lifted off the floor of the housing, so this shrimp should be well protected, if not in a little tight space. Still, it's amazing. Not one, but 2 shrimp managed to get past all the slots, tubes, twists, and turns. I think it's time to put a sponge over the intake, like that I have on all my other tank setups. After getting a few videos, I proceeded to try and find a way to get the 2 shrimp out safely by removing the media so as not to crush the sponge and kill the shrimp that was inside of the basket. I spooned out each pellet and carefully lifted the carbon bag. It took a bit longer than I'd like, but I had to keep checking back to make sure that I hadn't messed anything up. Eventually, I got down to the sponge, which was resting directly above the head of that first shrimp. So, I could pull the basket out, which would take the shrimp out of the water and possibly crush it in the process, or I could even more carefully take out the sponge, hoping that it didn't deform and crush the shrimp in another possibly deadly move. After peeling away and moving very slowly, I was able to get the sponge out while keeping the water, basket, and the 2 shrimp completely submerged and intact. Then I tried to use my spoon to lift them back into the tank water, but it proved much too difficult. For those of you who do not keep ghost shrimp, you will be interested to know that they can jump a bit when they need to. Other dwarf shrimp can jump also when they get into a pinch, but you'd usually get them on the surface of a sponge and inside of a net without issue. Ghost shrimp, however, are more likely to take that moment to test out their flight techniques and to see if it gets them out of the bind. So, the spoon wasn't successful at all. I was able to get the first shrimp with the net, though, and I was able to transfer him into the tank and remove the basket, revealing the larger of the 2 prisoners. I repeated the netting technique and then proceeded to try and clean everything up. So the whole reason that this happened is twofold. First, the 2 shrimp found their way into the filter intake. Time to put a sponge over that seemingly impenetrable grid. Second, there was enough space in the filter for a shrimp to survive, which, although encouraging, is not how the filter is supposed to work. I have to put the media into a mesh bag and make sure that the sponge is pressed down, filling in all the available space snugly. This way, if there is any resistance, the water flows up onto the exterior walls and doesn't push the sponge around, dislodging other media, and potentially creating a flooding. All in all, I'd say I'm much more confident now that these changes have been made to the filter. It still remains to be seen if this will be the final combination of filter components, or if I'm going to opt for something bigger, slower, and more relaxed. After all, this cheap AquaClear is actually pushing my substrate around, and it makes quite a bit of a mess, even on its lower volume setting. So, it's able to do this because it just dumps the return water down its waterfall. It might seem like overkill, but in the case of this tank, a canister filter or simple sponge filter might be a better option. I think I'm going to try both over the next 2 weeks. A week or so later, and both shrimp that were trapped in the filter are now doing great. I put a good simple sponge over the intake, but I can't help but check every so often to see if another shrimp has somehow managed to get stuck in there again. I have to say that seeing the little creature chilling inside of the filter and chowing down on choice bits of biofilm that no other shrimp could get access to really surprised me. I almost wanted to leave them there, but I figured that it would be too risky in the long term and would probably result in the shrimp dying eventually. Additionally, I found a dead ghost shrimp stuck in the sponge while I was cleaning it out. So, in actuality, there were 3 total shrimp that managed to make their way past the filter grate. So go ahead and check the related filter accessories out on the internet, and you'll see why they call them shrimp screens. It's not for nothing, folks. Anyway, Moving on to the 30-gallon tank that has the snowball shrimp, the bamboo shrimp, and now the vampire shrimp in it. I have some good news and some worrying developments. Basically, the vampire shrimp have gone into hiding. It's hard to tell if they're having trouble and getting stuck or if they're just keeping to themselves and sticking to the shadows. When I do eventually see them, it's after a couple days of waiting it out, and only then can I breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that they're alive and well. Of the 2 vampire shrimp that I got, one is much less visible than the other, and since I introduced them to the tank, the darker colored vampire shrimp has actually been absent much more often. I've only been able to see them once or twice a week, and that's if I do a really good job looking out for them and search in all the good hiding spots. None of this is made any easier by the fact that the Java moss is growing out of control. When Java moss or any other moss of this family grows, they like a lot of light, and when they don't get enough light, they grow in long strings and don't branch off. There's one big mountain that grows the moss in this tank, and there are plenty of shaded areas where the growing is just not great for these mosses. To make a long story short, this mountain is covered in stringy lengths of tangled moss. No tight, beautiful evergreen formations until you get to the very tippy top. This makes trimming an absolute nightmare. You clip one bit and it doesn't disconnect from the larger mass because it's tangled in the other strands. It's not a tight clump, and so you can't really cut out sections. It's just not easy to make it look good. So, our vampire shrimp have been using this nest of tangled, ugly moss as their hiding spot. Hopefully I'll be able to trim it soon and get better visibility across the tank. Not just for my enjoyment, but also to keep maintenance good and to make sure that all of the shrimp are healthy and happy, which is very important for these newly added vampire shrimp. So, top of my list, trim that ugly looking moss, and then try and scoop it up and trim it again and scoop it up and trim it again until it actually looks like a presentable mess. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed my Ghost Shrimp Escape adventure, and I thank you for joining me today. If you have stuck around until now, that must mean that you're a fan, as most of you are dipping out around the 5-minute mark. So, if you are around now, you'll probably want to subscribe because there's plenty more stuff just like this in the pipeline. I'm pretty much doing shrimp stuff from here and into the future. Anyway, thank you for joining again, and I'll see you next time. Good night.